Hey there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess with So Many Creations. In this video, I'm going to give you a very much requested redo, a reboot, a remake, whatever you want to call it. I have a video on my YouTube channel that has been there for probably about 3 years. It's a pretty old one. And that is for the fully lined boxy pouches. We've gone over these time and again. I've been teaching them a lot lately. I do have this complete video already uploaded and it's very popular. So why am I redoing it? Why am I adding another video to my collection that I've already done? I also have a clear and cork tutorial. I also have a mini unlined version, and I have the little faux train case, which is basically a boxy pouch. So again, what's the need to redo it? Well, I will tell you two really big things. I don't love the original video. I'll be honest, I haven't watched it in quite a while. I know that it gets the point across. I know that it is popular and it is well watched. However, I haven't watched it in a while because it makes me cringe a little bit. That's right. I filmed it, I'm pretty sure, in my living room. It might have even been filmed on an ironing board. I don't remember because it's been so long. So I know the lighting wasn't great. I know that everything about the video could have been better. So I wanted to do that. I have a studio. I have better lighting. That's my first reason. My second reason is because of you. Many of you, so many of you, have left comments asking one of the big questions, which is, how do you add handles and tabs? You talked about it, you mentioned that it's possible, but you never showed us. How would we know where to add them, what size, all that good stuff. I also get quite a few questions on embroidery placement. I want to embroider initials or a name. How do I know where to place that? Well, this is going to be the video for you because we are going to go over how to make a fully lined boxy pouch with handles on either side. We're also going to talk about adding tabs. There's some little tabs on here. This one I did in two-tone. We're going to go over the sizes for that. We're also going to talk about double zippers compared to single zippers. We're going to troubleshoot when we have some zipper issues when we're doing our closing steps. And we're going to go through everywhere that you might want to add embroidery and how you would want to place that. I'm going to give you everything that I gave you before, but better, and I'm going to add some stuff. So I hope you like this video. If you need the supply list or you need anything like cork or zippers, you can find it right here on my website. During the video, I'm also going to give you the sizes and the corners that you're going to cut and the dimensions that you'll need. So if you don't want to download anything, that's okay too. Totally fine. I have updated the sheet as well. So I have gone through and added a few things for you. So if you've already downloaded it, you might want to go back and grab another copy. If you like videos like this, don't forget to click subscribe, hit the notification bell, and give it a thumbs up. All right, let's get into it. The moment that you have all been waiting for has finally arrived. Maybe not. Maybe I'm the only one that waited for this. I have wanted to redo this tutorial for quite some time now, and I figured now is as good a time as ever. I have been teaching a lot of boxy pouch classes, and it's that time of the year. I don't know when you're going to watch this, but for us right now, it is getting close to the holidays and that time of the year where makers are making. They're making presents. They're making craft fair items. They're making all sorts of things. So this is one of my go-tos. This is what gets me out of my sewing funk when I'm just not feeling it. This is also just an easy thing that I know I can make pretty much anytime I want because I don't need a lot of supplies, and I do so in my studio and also at home, and most of the time I'm going to have the fabric or cork and zippers enough to make one of these pouches. So when I'm just kind of feeling like I need to make something, this is usually it. So what we're going to do before we start getting into remaking this and adding all the new things, we're going to go over one of the other questions that I get asked a bit, which is what is the finish size, and also where would be a great place to add embroidery. Now the finish size of these boxy pouches is listed on the original download, which you can find on my website, as well as the original video. The original video is on my YouTube channel, but it is linked on the tutorials and free patterns page of the website. So when we're looking at these, the pattern gives you the small, the medium, and the large. Again, you can play around and make whatever size you want to. Let's start with the small though. Let's talk about this one just for a minute. I would probably not recommend going any smaller than this if you're doing fully lined. The reason is these corners and this zipper end right here, this gets really tight. So if you are going to try to make this even smaller, I would say make it as an unlined boxy pouch. You could use cork or clear vinyl, whatever you like. I would not make this as a fully lined and make it any smaller. Now, that being said, you can make this longer if you wanted to make this into a pencil case. I probably would not play with the corners or make this any shorter at all, or make the height of the cut pieces any smaller. I just think that would end up giving you some problems. So for the small size, I've cut my pieces 6 inches high by 10 inches wide. The corners are going to be 1 inch, and the finished size of this is going to be 3 inches this way, 3 inches wide here, 6.5 inches wide on the longer side, and about 2.5 inches high. So that is the small size. Now, if I was going to add embroidery to this, obviously I can find my center. That's not going to be, difficult to do. But where would I start? How close to the zipper do I want to get? So for me, what I usually do is I measure from the zipper and I scoot it about 1/4 of an inch over, because remember, we have seam allowance. So I'm 1/4 of an inch from this finished edge. And if I went out about 1 inch and I started anywhere, and of course this is kind of squishing because of the way I'm holding it. If I started 1 inch, 1.5 inches from here, I would get a nice design right in the middle there. I would take my design and I would probably stick with about 3 inches high at the maximum. So again, I would start roughly 1 inch, 1.5 inches or so from the zipper or from the top edge, and I would make my design no more than 3 inches high. So that's how I would add embroidery to the small pouch. Let's go to our medium next. This is what we're going to be making in today's video because these are the ones that I have cut out. I do love the large one, but the medium is the one that I've been making a lot of. So I'm going to go with the medium today. So the medium is going to be cut 8 inches high by 13 inches wide. The corners on the medium are going to be cut 1.5. The finished size is going to be 8.5 this way by 4.5 this way by 3.5 inches high. And for embroidery or anything decorative on this, I would start my embroidery about 2 inches from the top edge, and I would not make my embroidery any taller than 3.5 inches. That's what I would do for the medium size. And last but not least, let's take a look at the large. The large pieces are going to be cut 10 inches high by 15 inches wide. The corners are 2 inches. Your finished size is going to be 9.5 inches this way by 5 inches deep this way by 4.5 inches high. For anything special, any embroidery, I would start this one about 3 inches, maybe 2.5 from the top edge, and I would max out at around 4 inches. So now that we have all that information, and I'm going to go ahead on the next screen, and I'm also going to put these sizes for you so that you have them. So if you want to go to the next screen, you can just kind of pause and jot those down, or again, download the PDF on my website. Next thing we're going to do is take a look at the 2 boxy pouches I have cut out, and I'll show you what we're going to do with both of those. So I've gone ahead and I've cut out 2 medium-sized boxy pouches. This is the one that we're going to start with right here. This is the plain one. So let's talk about this one first. I'm going to do them separately. I'm going to make this bag. We're going to add a handle or handles to this bag. And then I'm going to jump back to this one. I don't want to keep going back and forth and confuse anyone. So let's take a look at the pieces that I've cut out first, and then we're going to focus on this one. So because this is the medium size, I have my zipper, and I always cut my zipper a few inches wider than the widest part of the bag. So for the medium, they're 8 by 13. So my zipper is 17 inches. Definitely longer than it needs to be, and I like to keep my zippers a little on the longer side. If you want to be more conservative, you can go shorter. I like to keep my zipper pulls as far away from my machine as possible. So that's just me. We're going to talk about zipper pulls and how to address your zippers as well in this video. So I have my zipper. I'm just going to move that aside. And we'll talk about handles in just a second. So I've gone ahead and I've cut for the outside 2 pieces of cork. I am not adding any interfacing to these. The cork is substantial enough, it doesn't need anything. So if you are using something lighter weight or you're using a cotton or a canvas, anything outside that's not going to hold its shape, you're going to want to interface. So if I was using this right here, which is my lining, if I was using that on the outside, I would interface it. So I have my 2 cork pieces, again, 8 by 13 for the medium size. And I have 2 pieces of Essex linen. That's what I chose for my inside. These are also 8 by 13. So we want all 4 of our pieces the same exact size. Again, if you're using scraps or you're playing around with different sizes, you can do whatever size you want. Just make sure your 2 linings and your 2 outsides are the same size. Because this is a linen and it's a little bit on the lighter side, it's more like a quilting cotton weight, I have interfacing. My preferred interfacing is Decor Bond. You can also use Decoville Light or anything that you choose. I tend to go with a medium to medium heavy interfacing. I would not call this or Decoville Light heavy. I would call something like Decoville Heavy a heavy interfacing. So I want a medium to medium heavy interfacing. That's my personal preference and I like fusible. Use whatever you have on hand. You can make these however you want. So I have my 2 pieces for the lining and 2 for the outside. And I've also gone ahead and I've cut my 2 little handles right here. These for the medium size, I've cut 2 inches wide. I would cut that for all of them. That's going to finish at 1 inch. And I've cut them 6 inches in width. If I were making handles for the small bag, I would cut them again 2 inches by 5. And for the large bag, I would cut 2 inches by 8. Those are just the measurements that I like. Play around and see, but it's a good starting point. Now, because I'm using cork, that's why I cut these at 2 inches, because I'm just going to fold them in half and top stitch them like I would any other handle. If you are making these from cotton or anything that frays, you would want to interface just like you did here, and you would want to cut them 4 inches. The reason is you would be folding your edges inward like this towards the center and folding one more time to make nice clean edges. I don't have to do that on the cork. I can just fold it in half. So you can use the bag handle technique that I've used in a lot of my other videos. If you want a little refresher on that, you can watch many of my videos. I even have some little clips and shorts, or you can use whatever handle technique you prefer. For a little boxy pouch like this, especially with cork outside, this is how I'm gonna do it. Just fold it in half and top stitch. We'll get there when we start working on this bag. So this is gonna be the one that we start with. So I'm just gonna set this aside just for a minute, and we're gonna talk about what I have here. So I decided for this one, I'm going to add tabs. I have not cut them out yet, and I'll show you why when we get to this pouch. This again is a medium size. So I have my zipper, which I have cut again about 17 inches. That's just kind of where I like to cut it. I have 2 zipper pulls, and I'll show you how to add 2 zipper pulls on and get them nice and straight. This one has a single pull. I'm gonna do a double on the other pouch. Excuse me. Let's start with the lining. The lining is again 8 inches high by 13 inches wide. I have quilter's cotton and I have interfaced it. So these 2 pieces are ready to go. But for the outside, I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to do a 2-tone look. Kind of like the one that I did in the clear boxy pouch tutorial. I wanted to do something that was a little bit different. I didn't want to do all Halloween or all black. So what I did for this, very simple. I took the height of these pieces, which is 8. I divided my piece in half and I added 1/4 inch. So this number is 8, this is 4 1/4, and this is 4 1/4. It's half of the height plus 1/4 inch for each one for your seam allowance. Once I sew these 2 together, they will be 8 inches high. My width of 13 does not change. I can, oh, no, I didn't. I thought that I just cut that wrong. They just weren't lined up together. So if I was doing the large pouch, which is 10 inches high by 15 wide, I would cut these 5 1/4 each. 5 plus 5 is 10 plus my seam allowance, still keeping it 15. Same for the small. So all you're going to do is just cut your height in half, add your seam allowance, and that's it. So I'm going to set these aside. I am not going to be starting on that one. I'm going to start on our simple one right here. So I've already gone ahead and I've added my zipper pull on. When it comes to sewing this zipper onto here, it all depends on what machine I'm using and what foot I'm using. There's a couple of ways that I can address the pull. I'm going to show you my preferred way. That way I can show you what happens when we get to closing the sides. Just in case you have any issues, there's a few little fixes that we can do. So the first thing I'm going to do is move one of my outsides and one of my linings. Just going to get those out of the way. I'm going to take my zipper and I'm working on the longer side. So this is my 13-inch side. I'm going to place my zipper right side down and I'm letting the zipper pull hang off the edge. You don't have to if that's not how you prefer to do it, but because of the foot I'm using, I find it easier to do that. I'm going to grab some clips and I'm just going to clip this in place. Now there's two ways that you can baste this in place. And just note, when I say baste, I do not necessarily mean a longer stitch or a basting type stitch. When I use the term baste in bag making, what I mean is making sure that this zipper is attached in some way to the outside to keep it straight. So you can use double stick tape, you can use clips, or you can sew it on your machine less than 1/4 inch. Whatever is most comfortable for you. The reason I don't like to take this and my lining and my zipper and sew it all at once with my full seam allowance, my zipper usually shifts a little bit and then it gets crooked. And I want my zipper as straight as I can get it. So when I get to the machine, I'm probably just going to baste this really quick and then add this piece. But let me show you how the sandwich is gonna look. I have my outside right side up, my zipper right side down, and I'm gonna take one of my lining pieces, also right side down. Add a couple more clips here. When I'm at the machine, now I'm going to sew 1/4 inch and I'm making sure that I backstitch. I backstitch when I start and stop every seam. So I'm going to sew from here all the way to here, full 1/4 inch seam. Again, when I get over there, I'm probably just going to baste this on less than 1/4 inch. While I'm at my machine, I'm also going to prep my handles. So what I'm going to do for these really simply is I'm just going to fold these in half, just like this. So they are 1 inch high by 6 inch wide now, instead of 2 inches high. And I'm just gonna top stitch however I want to. I'm going to go on both sides, at least 1/8 inch, and I'll add an extra 1/4 if I want to. So I'm gonna head to the machine and prep these, and I'm gonna start sewing this. I finished up stitching my first halves together and I top stitched my handles. I'm gonna set these aside since I don't need them until the end, but as you can see, I just folded my cork in half and top stitch 1/8 inch, and I decided to also do 1/4 inch from each side. Very simple. I'm gonna set these aside now. Now for the bag, as you might be able to see, I'm not sure if it's gonna pick up on camera, right here you can see that there is 1/8 inch stitching, and then there's also 1/4. I did baste my outside to the zipper using 1/8 inch, then I added my lining and I sewed that a full 1/4 inch, making sure to back stitch. So now that that's done, I'm gonna open this up. I'm not going to top stitch anything just yet. I'd rather wait until I was completely done. I'll give it a good press and then I'll top stitch. So I'm just folding both of my pieces back. My zipper is right side up, so is my cork. So I'm going to grab my other 2 pieces and I'm going to repeat the process, taking my cork right sides together with the other piece of cork. And that's going to line up on this side of the zipper. I'm going to turn this over. After I have that basted in place, I'm going to take my fabric, right sides together with the other fabric, and I'm going to stitch this on, again, 1/4 inch, making sure to backstitch. So that's how my sandwich looks. I have fabric, right sides together, red to red, and on this side, I have cork, right sides together, print to print. Zipper is in the middle. When you're ready to sew, the only thing you should be looking at on your zipper is the ends. You shouldn't see any of the middle part of the zipper, and you should see the back side or the wrong side of the fabric and cork. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that. I'll be back to show you how to press and top stitch. I'm all stitched together. I've got both of my lining and both of my outsides together. So now what I'm going to do is open up so I can see the right sides of everything. So there's the right sides of my cork and the right sides of the lining. I'm going to head over to the iron and give this a good press. What you want to make sure does not happen is that your lining doesn't roll up into your zipper, because if this happens, your zipper is not going to work properly. It's going to get stuck. And this can happen especially when you have something a little bit heavier on the outside. You can finger press, but I figure I'm here, I have my iron, I'm gonna go ahead and give it a really good press. I'll press on both sides. Yes, I press on my cork. I've been doing it for years and it doesn't hurt anything. So I'm just kind of giving it a gentle tug just to make sure everything is flat. If it helps, you can throw a few clips in here as well. Once I have this pressed and ready to go, I'm gonna top stitch on either side of the zipper. I can do 1/8 or 1/4. It's up to me, however I want to do it. I'm probably just going to do whatever foot I have on, which I believe is my 1/4. But this top stitching will not affect your zipper. If you have made other traditional, not boxy pouches, but zippered pouches, sometimes the way that you top stitch can affect your zipper layout. Sometimes people do it a little bit differently than they normally would. This one is going to be flat, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to go through the outside as well as the lining, 1/8 or 1/4, whatever I choose. My top stitching is all done. I headed over to the ironing board. I gave it a good press from both sides because I want to make sure that especially my lining, since I'm not always looking at it, is not rolling up into the zipper. So I decided to do 1/4 inch from each side. You can do 1/8, you can do whatever you would like. It really does not make a difference. So I went through the outside as well as the lining. So now it's time to start closing this up. We're going to close the bottom edges and then start working on the sides. So going forward, it's going to be important that our zipper pull is inside the bag. When I sewed my pieces on, my pull was hanging off the edge. So I'm going to want that inside here. Now taking a look at this, when we get to our next steps, down here, my zipper is closed. So that's going to be really easy when it comes to closing the sides. This one, however, is open, and that can be a little bit more challenging because now I'm trying to close the sides of my pouch, but I also have to worry about keeping these ends together. So here's a couple of ways that you can fix it. So first thing you can do is head over to the machine before you do any other, your next step, and just go ahead and stitch over these ends. Close that up to keep those zipper ends together. That's definitely going to help for finishing. You can also use a lighter if you want to burn the ends. Totally up to you and depends on what kind of zipper you're using. For me, what I actually like to do, and don't worry, you don't have to do this if you're not feeling super brave, I like to just take my zipper pull completely off and then put it back on. The reason is because then I can really control both ends. I know that they're both totally closed, and I'm very comfortable with putting this back on. I know that I can get it on straight. If you struggled to get it on the first time and you're not feeling super brave, you do not have to do that. For me, it's just as easy. So I zip and then I unzip a little bit so I have an opening in the center here. Now you might be wondering to yourself, if you were just going to take the zipper pull off and put it back on, why did you have it on in the first place and why was it hanging off the edge? Because I like to make sure that my zipper is nice and straight when I'm doing it on here. I like to hang it off the edge to make sure that it's not in the way of my foot. Had I used a different foot, I probably could have kept it in the middle, but I was using a foot that's a little wider. The zipper pull gets in the way, and quite frankly, I'm just lazy. I'm weird lazy. I don't want to sew with the zipper pull in the way, but I don't mind taking it off and putting it back on. I don't really have an explanation for myself, but I am who I am. So now you have two different options. You have the brave option and the not feeling it today option of just sewing across your ends. So the only other thing that I want to do before I start closing it up is I want to take a look at my sides. I don't care about the bottom and the edges right here. I care about the sides because if anything here is not lined up and this is not perfectly straight, it can definitely affect the bag going forward and make your seam allowances a little bit more challenging. My cork is off a little bit right here. It's not really much to worry about. And my lining is just askew, like just skewed right off the edge here. So I'm just gonna take my ruler, since I'm getting ready to close this up anyway, and I'm just gonna straighten this edge. I am taking off the bare minimum that I have to. I'm kind of lining up to make sure that I'm keeping everything straight. And yes, I'm gonna cut the zipper end right off because I don't really need it anymore. On this side, I don't think I'm that far off, but I might as well just go ahead and straighten it up. I'm not worried about my measurements because it does not matter if I'm taking off 1/8 or 1/4 inch. It's really not going to affect the finished bag. And nobody is going to know if my bag is a little smaller or a little bigger than theirs. So it doesn't make a difference. So there we go. Now I have nice straight edges, much easier to work with. So the next thing I'm going to do is grab a few clips here. Again, make sure that my zipper pull is inside the bag and I have an opening here. I'm going to grab my cork and I'm going to pull my cork to cork. So that's right sides together. Add a couple of clips here. And I'm going to pull my lining pieces right sides together. And I'm just going to take this to the machine and do a little bit of sewing on these edges right here. So if my zipper is here, I'm sewing on the sides that are the same direction as the zipper. I'm sewing my long edge here of my outside pieces, which is my cork, all the way across, 1/4 inch. And on the lining, I'm going to sew a couple of inches on each end and leave a really big opening in the center. My long edges are all sewn. I sewed all the way across the outside, and on the lining, I left a big opening in the center. So now we're going to start to close up the sides. You're going to want to grab some clips, and you're going to start on one end. You're going to take your seam from your lining, pull that right in, lining it up on the wrong side of the zipper, right in the center. And you can add a clip. And then you're going to take the cork and do the same thing. Take that seam and line it up on the right side of the zipper. It's right in the center. Now don't worry about what direction those seams are going in. We're not doing anything with that just yet. So I'm kind of flattening out my bag. There's my opening. I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm taking my seam. I'm pulling it in towards the bottom of the zipper. And I'm taking the seam on this side and pulling it towards the top of the zipper. They are right in the center. So all of my seams are right in the center of the zipper teeth, as best as I possibly can get. Again, not concerned with the direction of my seams. That will be in the next step. For this one, we're going to sew these little X's right here, these little separate wings, and we're going to keep them separate. So I like to add a clip to each of them. I'm just kind of straightening them out, smoothing them out like this. And I'll do the same thing on this side, just smoothing them out. Just like that. So there's my seam, there's my seam, there's my opening, and I have now 8 little separate corners, 4 here and 4 here. I'm going to head to the machine and using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew all 8 of these separate from each other. I'm not sewing anything together. I'm going to start here at the fold and I'm going to sew as close to the zipper tape as I can get. My zipper tape is right here. So I'm going to have a gap in the middle when I'm done, and there's a reason for that. We will discuss that when we're done. I'm going to just sew 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 down here, leaving a gap in the middle. I don't want to touch any part of the zipper. I stitched all 8 of my little corners here, so you can see they are stitched totally separately from each other. In the center, there is still a hole. There's an opening right there. The reason for that is a couple things. First, that would be where you would add a tab, which is what we're going to do in the next sample. We're not going to do that for today in this one. It's also to make sure that boxing and cutting the corners is easier. The less of a gap that we have to fill here, the better. So the next thing that we're going to do is close this gap, but then we're going to mark and cut our corners. And the more that these are sewn together, the harder it is to pull this up to cut a corner and also to box it. So there's a reason why we leave that gap. Now you might be wondering, couldn't I just sew all the way across it and just cut one corner from each piece? Absolutely. That, however, will result in you having raw edges inside of your bag. I do this technique so that we don't have raw edges. You will do it a little bit differently if you're making an unlined pouch. That's what I did in the clear boxy pouch tutorial, as well as the unlined mini boxy pouches. But for something like this that's fully lined, we only want the smallest gap possible. And that's why I leave just that zipper unstitched. So before I go ahead and do my corners, I'm going to go back to the machine and I'm going to close this gap. So I only want to sew from right here where I stopped to right here where I stopped. And I'm going through all of these layers. So I'm just going to be closing it from here to here on both sides. That is going to be the only part of the bag that's stitched together. When I'm sewing this, now I care about my seams. I can either open them up, or what I do is just kind of turn them in opposite directions. Try to reduce a little bit of the bulk so it's still domestic friendly. So I have one to the right and one to the left. I'll throw a clip on there and I'm just going to close this gap. I'm going to do the same thing down here, pushing my seams in opposite directions and closing up that little gap. I used a pen to show you exactly where I stitched. So from this red mark to this red mark, that's the only place that I stitched. You can see these are still loose and independent. And now the gap in the center is totally closed. And that's going to be really important for our next step. So that's why we only want to do a little bit right here. So now that everything is completely closed except for that opening, now we're going to mark and cut our corners. So you can use a regular ruler for this if you would like. The corners for the medium are going to be 1.5 inches. If you want to change that up, if you do a smaller corner, so let's say a 1 inch, your bag is going to be taller when it's finished. If you do a bigger corner, your bag is going to be a little wider and squattier when it's finished. But definitely play around with the corners and, try some different things out. I forgot my pen. I had to go grab that. So you're going to be measuring 1.5 inches from the fold right here and 1.5 inches from the seam. So you're not going to come to this edge. You're going to measure from that 1/4 inch seam. So I am lining up my template and I'm just going to go ahead and mark. I'm going to try to do that again and make a pen actually work. Okay, I need a new pen. All right, let's try that again with a pen that actually works. There we go. My goodness. Okay, so there is my corner. I'm going to do that on all 8 of these. So I'm just going to kind of keep turning, do my lining, and then flip it over. Again, 1.5 inches from the seam and 1.5 inches from the fold. This is very important because otherwise your corners will be uneven. They will not line up for you, and you will spend way too much time trying to make something happen that's not going to happen. So you always want to measure from the folded edge and measure from the stitch line, 1.5 inches. And do the same thing over here. And once I get these measured, I can go ahead and cut them. I like to use scissors because then I know I'm not over cutting. If you use a rotary cutter, you want to be really careful when you get to the inner corner that you don't overcut. I mean, you can do it with scissors too. You don't want your scissors to go too far in, but it's definitely easier to do with a rotary cutter. So I would just prefer to use my scissors. I'm going to cut all 8 of those just like that. And then we're going to box these corners. And we'll also add in the handles that we made. So I've got those all cut. I'm going to start on the cork side, which is the outside. I always like to start there just because I like to make sure my outside looks the nicest. If my inside is not perfect, I can live with it. I want the outside to look as good as I can. So a couple things to note here. You're going to be boxing each of these corners again individually. So you're going to have 8 total corners. This stitching right now, you've just cut into it. You can go back and reinforce that on your machine, or you're just going to want to be extra careful with that. And before I do anything, I like to go in here and just kind of open my zipper a little bit more. I find that it gives me a little extra room to play. So I'm not going to reinforce these, but I'm going to be real careful with it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of fold my lining out of the way. I'll hold on to that seam and I'm going to very gently straighten that out. So I'm going to add a couple clips. Okay, make sure that I put a clip right there on that seam. I want to make sure that doesn't go anywhere. Keep that as straight as I can. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to do the same thing. Now I'm clipping these before I add my little handles on, just because I think it's a little easier this way. So I can make sure everything looks good. They're nice and straight. I'm going to come down here and do the same thing on these outside corners. So again, I am just pulling these kind of out. So I'm going to straighten that out just like that. My seam should be in the middle now, and it should be nice and straight across here. One last corner, this one, kind of put my fingers in the center and pull that straight, being extra gentle so I don't rip out my stitching. So once I have those ready, before I do any stitching, I am going to take one of my handles on one side. I'm just gonna open this up. I'm gonna take my handle and slide it in. I'm kind of centering the handle with the seam. Hopefully you can see that. I didn't measure anything. I'm just kind of roughly estimating here. Keep my handle straight. Kind of put that in the center. I'll put my clip back. Now I'm gonna reach in over here and grab my handle. Make sure it's not twisted. And again, get that right in the middle of that seam, like that. All right, that is ready to go. Do the same thing over here. So again, I'm taking my handle, I'm gonna open this up, and I'm gonna slide my handle in gently. There's my handle, there's my seam. I'm roughly centering the handle. This is why I like to box the corner with my fingers first. I just find it's a little bit easier because now I know where I want it to go. For this one, I'm just gonna open up so I can peek inside, grab the handle, make sure it's not twisted. Kind of just slide that down. So there is my seam. My handle is roughly centered. And clip. So I'm gonna sew those 4 outside corners, 1/4 of an inch all the way across, keeping it as straight as I can, making sure to backstitch. When I'm done, I'm gonna box the lining corners as well. Same thing, just straightening each of those out, being careful of the seam, sewing 1/4 of an inch. So I've got 8 corners to do, and I'm just about done. All right, I've got all my corners all sewn and my little handle is in. So now it's time to turn it right side out. You can see there's my corners. It looks like a mess. It looks like a giant mess before you turn it right side out because that's just the way it is. So we're gonna turn this. I'm gonna really poke my corners out here. Do the same thing over here. Oops, I didn't sew one of my corners. I'll be right back. Try that again. I did actually sew my corner. I ran a bobbin thread. So that's always fun on the very last corner. Whatever. So let's go ahead and turn. All right. I'm gonna poke my corners out, trim any little threads that I have. All right. And now I still have to sew my opening closed, but how cute is that with my little handle? Got one on each side. All right. Kind of get that last corner. All right, so there it is. I am going to just close up the lining and then I am ready and I'll show you how this looks. All right, I closed my lining. I just kind of tuck my edges in. I don't do anything real special there. Just get that inside and it is done. So now we have a cork outside, fabric inside, single zipper pull with a handle on each side. Simple, easy peasy. If you want, you can give this a final press. If you want to make it really square, what I'll do sometimes is kind of fold this edge, put it down, iron it, do the same thing here, and then try to iron like these ends, or you can just leave it. It still has a great shape all on its own. You may notice that this handle has the finished side up. This handle has the raw side up because I didn't pay any attention when I put it in. When you put your handle in, if that's important to you and you want to make sure they're going in the same direction, you want to make sure that this finished edge is towards the zipper. I just kind of put them in and let it happen the way it's going to happen. That's just kind of how I live my life. So you can be a little bit more precise than me. That's how I did mine. So now that we have this done, we're going to grab our pieces for the two-tone. I'm going to show you how to do a double zipper pull and also how to add on tabs. All right, now it's time for boxy pouch number 2. We're going to make another medium-sized pouch. This one is going to be two-tone on the outside. It's also going to have 2 zipper pulls and it's going to have tabs. Because I just went through from start to finish how to make a boxy pouch, I'm not going to go through every single step in detail, but I will tell you again the order of steps that we're doing. So I have here my zipper, and I'm gonna go ahead and add my zipper pulls. Since I'm doing a Halloween theme, I have this cute bat and a little skull. So I'm just going to put the skull on first. It doesn't really matter. And I'm just putting each side in just a little bit. And then I like to put it down on a hard surface. I use my fingers to hold it and I wiggle and pull it on. When I get down here, it doesn't matter if this is totally even because we're gonna open it up again. And you're going to add pull number 2. So pull number 2 is going to be more important because we really wanna keep it straight. So I just kind of get that on there and then put it down so I can take a look. And before I add the pull, I kind of do my little pinch test. And to me, that looks pretty straight. So we're going to give it a go. If not, I would adjust it. And I'm just going to put it on and there we go. Nice and perfect and straight. So I've got my pulls on. First thing I'm going to do before I add that to the outside is I'm going to sew the outside pieces together. So again, I am making the medium-sized pouch, which measures 8 inches high by 13 inches wide. Those are the pieces I have cut here for the lining. Because I'm doing a two-tone look, I still have my pieces cut 13 inches wide, but I cut each of these 4 1/4 inches high. I divided my height in half, added 1/4 inch to each for my seam allowance. So I'm going to take these to the machine. I'm just going to put them right sides together, set number 1, set number 2, sew them with 1/4 inch seam, open it up and press it, and I'll top stitch if I want to. Because this is directional, I'm making sure to add the bottom fabric to the bottom of the print. I stitched my 2 outside panels together, so I have those all ready to go. So I placed my cork and my cotton. This is actually a lightweight canvas. Right sides together, I stitched 1/4 inch seam. I pressed my seam open, as you can see right here, and I top stitch 1/8 inch on either side. I opened it to reduce some bulk, and then I top stitch 1/8 inch to make sure that I held that seam down nicely. So now that these are done, they measure 8 inches wide, just like my lining pieces, and they are 13 inches wide, also like my lining pieces. So now that I have these ready, I'm gonna go ahead and just assemble my boxy pouch the way I did before. Here's the difference. I do have a double zipper for this one, so I can still move the pulls off the edge. This time when I get to the finishing steps, I won't have to worry about putting my zipper pull back on or finishing my ends, because this will make sure that I don't have any of that open end or gapping. So I've got one of my outsides, one of my linings, and I have my zipper. I moved my zipper pulls down to one end and just added a clip. I'm going to place my zipper again, right sides together with the outside. I'm working on the top edge. I'm going to base this in place with 1/8 inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to take my lining, add my lining right sides together, and sew that 1/4 inch all the way across here. I will open this up and repeat the same step with my other 2 lining and outside pieces. I'm all finished here. I have my 2 outsides sewn on. I made sure that I lined up on the top edges here. That way my print will be right side up when I'm done. I also have my lining pieces in. I sewed them on opposite sides of the zipper, and then I did my top stitching. So now that I have those pieces in, I'm going to move my zipper pulls into the middle. And here's one of the great things about doing a double zipper pull. I don't have an open end. I don't have to worry about that like I did before. So because my zipper pulls close towards each other, it eliminates that. Now that I have this all set, I'm going to give this a quick little trim. I can see that I'm off just a little tiny bit right here. Just gonna square up this edge just like I did before. Now I'm gonna go ahead and open these and close my outside edges. So I have my 2 black bottom pieces. Those are gonna go right sides together. Add a couple clips. And on here, I'm gonna close up my lining, leaving a big opening for turning. Once I'm done, I'm gonna start working on the sides. And when I get to the corners, when I'm ready to cut them, that is what I'm gonna make my tabs out of. So you might have noticed that I'm going to put tabs in this, but I haven't cut them out yet. And that's because I'm going to use some of the material that I'm cutting from here. Edges are sewn, so let's go over how to close up the sides again. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but just so you can keep watching the steps over and over again. Got my clips here. I am taking the seams and pulling them to the zipper. So the lining goes to the bottom of the zipper. The outside goes to the front of the zipper. I'm gonna add a clip. Come down here, same thing. And now I've got my 8 corners. Smooth these out. Put a clip on each one. Just so you can see the seam on this one. I want you to just see that it is not right on the edge here. It's actually kind of right there, right on the end. So just so you know how your seam is gonna look. And I don't really think it makes much of a difference at all. But just in case you were wondering, sometimes when you're at home, you don't know if you did something right or wrong or if it's going to affect the bag. So I've got that all clipped and ready to go. I'm gonna go ahead and stitch my 8 corners, not touching any part of the zipper, and then we will talk about tabs. I've got my 8 sides all sewn. And so the next step that we would be doing is to close up the gap in the center. However, we're gonna be adding tabs, and I haven't cut them out yet. I need some tabs. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to skip ahead, cut some of my corners, not box them, and then I will make the tabs. So what I'm gonna do is on this side right here, which is my outside, I'm going to mark my 1.5 inch corners. So I'm marking from the fold and from the seam. Go ahead and just mark. Right. And these tabs are not going to be huge. They're not going to be giant tabs. The reason is we don't really need them to be. The tabs on a boxy pouch are really just to have something to grab onto when you are opening and closing your zipper. So if you want to make separate tabs, if you have some scraps of cork or fabric and you want to go ahead and make little handles, kind of like we did in the first one, you can absolutely do that. I'm going to be efficient here and use what I'm going to cut and throw away anyhow. And I'm just going to dismantle this little corner. So I just cut 2 of my corners and then just get rid of my stitches here. I am going to trim this little guy down. I'm going to cut it 1 inch wide. So it's 1 inch wide by 1.5 inches. I'm not going to do any finishing. Again, if you want to, you totally can. If you want to just use this as placement, that is fine. I'm just going to make some cute little tabs right here. I feel like this is big enough for me. So this is 1 inch by 1 3/4 inches. That's what size it comes out with the seam allowance. So again, I'm just going to open this up. There we go. I had to cut another corner because talking and cutting did not work well for me. So I had to cut another one, but that's okay. I'm going to cut them anyway. See guys, I'm just like you. All right, I have my 2 little tabs. I'm not going to top stitch them. I'm not going to do anything fancy. I'm just not feeling it right now. So I'm just going to take one of my little cork pieces here. I'm going to fold it in half. So again, it's 1 inch wide and it was 1 3/4 inches high. And I'm going to slide this in before I close up my gap here. And where you want to add this, you want the folded edge this little piece right here inward. So you want your raw edges out, and you want to put it right here on top of the zipper facing the cork. If you put this inside and it's on the lining fabric, guess where it's going to be when you're all set? That's right, inside, and that's not where we want it. So I've got that in there. I add a clip, come down here, tab number 2, fold that in half. There's my raw edge. My folded edge goes in and it sits right on top of the zipper. Just like that. Push my seams in opposite directions since I'm going to sew this. And I'm going to take this to the machine, close that gap, and then I'll come back and finish up my corners. The other reason that I like to only have a double layer tab instead of doing like a full handle, something like this, is because it depends on the machine that I'm working on. If I'm sewing on my HD9, I know that it can go through all these layers, no problem. If I'm sewing on my domestic, I want to be a little bit more cautious with it. So if I have now my 2 layers of my outside, 2 layers of lining, my zipper, and now I've made my tab 4 layers thick, it might get a little bit tricky with my domestic sewing machine. So that's going to be a call that's up to you. Kind of depends on how you want to handle it and what machine you're using. For me, I'm totally good with just having a couple of layers. So I'm going to finish up these ends and then come back and do my corners. Okay, my tabs are in. So if I want to make sure before I go too far, I can look through the hole in the lining, go right to the outside. So I'm opening my zipper. And when I get here, there is my little tab. And I've got the same thing on this side. Just like that. There is my tab. And that's where I want it, sitting on the zipper. So now I'm going to go ahead and finish up. I'm going to cut the rest of my corners. 1.5 inches. I'm measuring from the fold and from the seam. I'm going to get them all marked. I have 3 of them cut, so I have 5 more to go. And then I'm going to start boxing these corners and finishing up this bag. All right, it's all set. I did all of my corners, and now is the fun time. Turn it right side out. So there it is. I just have to close up my lining, which I will do. Other than that, there's my little tab. Yes, they are small, but they are perfectly fine with me. I'm going to go ahead, and because this one is part cork, part fabric, I am going to give this one a press. So I'm going to take it over and just close up the lining, press it, and I'll come right back. All right, that makes me much happier. I finished up the lining, I closed it, and then I went over to the iron, and again, I just kind of like pinch my edge, put it down, iron it, do the same thing on this side, and then I close up my zipper and I put this down and I iron there, and that just kind of gives it a little bit more shape. I think because it's fabric on the bottom and cork on the top, it just didn't quite have the shape I was hoping, and that's fine. Ironing it is what helped. So here's my little tabs. Yes, they are tiny, I know that, but I don't really need them except when I'm closing it up. And for me, they're plenty big enough. You can make yours bigger if you would like to. So we have a new and improved boxy pouch video. We talked about handles, we talked about tabs, we even talked about embroidery placement. I hope this answered all of your questions. I hope you enjoyed this. If you like videos like this, don't forget to hit subscribe, click the notification bell, and give it a thumbs up.